Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare wanted it all. It was the franchise's first move into an examination of the geopolitical nature of warfare in the 21st century and needed to tick a lot of boxes. It needed to build on the exponential success of the series that began with the first Call of Duty game in 2003. It needed to bring existing players with it as it made the shift into the modern era, as well as introduce brand new players to the series and its particular brand of shooter mechanics. It needed to actually set up the world in which the main story occurs, a near future setting, 2011 to be exact, in which Russia has descended into civil war and a coup d'etat has been carried out in a small but oil-rich country in the Middle East. Not that that last one would need all that much contextualization in a game made in 2007 mind. It needed to keep the same great feel of the combat mechanics of the previous games while also updating them, somehow making them feel slicker than they already were, making the modern weaponry, hardware and tactics feel modern as well as look modern. Finally, in keeping with the setting, the game's story needed to reflect the murky, hazy, vague nature of warfare in the 21st century. Being released right in the middle of the Iraq War, Desert Storm Part 2 if you will, a conflict that was met with considerable opposition both here in the UK and the US, Modern Warfare was almost duty-bound by the sacrifices made by the men and women in that war in particular to offer a soberer view of combat than was necessarily found in any of the franchise's previous titles. And it failed, completely, all because it was so good. Hello everyone, my name is Luke. The first Modern Warfare game was a revelation for the series. The shift from the tired, bloated Call of Duty 3 to the slick, fast-paced spectacle of its successor when experienced today is head-spinning. Though the campaign is a lot briefer than I remember, it feels compact, it feels succinct. The pace is at top speed from the beginning and it never really drops off. What lulls there are, I believe, thematic ones and actually make the action seem that much more punchy for it. There's almost no filler. If I was being really critical, I could argue the section of the endgame where your team take a detour to save a comrade from capture feels somewhat off, but as I said, I would have to really be looking for something to complain about in terms of Modern Warfare's pacing. The story itself is simple and places emphasis on gameplay and mechanics rather than the other way around. There are only a handful of characters, and their characterization is painted with very broad brushstrokes, but they are instantly memorable. Price's ridiculous facial hair, Gaz's baseball cap, Captain Macmillan's reassuring Scottish tones, Zakaya's missing arm, Griggs's saw, Lieutenant Vasquez's gravelly tones, the AC-130 operators' detached commentary on the devastation they are wreaking below them. Modern Warfare knew that its strength was on its gameplay and relies on caricature rather than the detailed characterization and plot centricity of other shooters from the time, namely the Brothers in Arms franchise for instance. It is my belief that shooting things reached its peak with the first Modern Warfare game and it really hasn't got better since then. It certainly hasn't changed within the Call of Duty franchise itself. The controls are tight and popping off controlled shots or tight bursts is really satisfying. It makes you feel like a real soldier. Switching between the wide variety of pistols, assault rifles, shotguns, sniper rifles, machine guns, grenades, flashbangs, C4 plastic explosives, grenade launchers, 105mm cannons, 40mm Bofors autocannons, 25mm Gatling guns and tactical knives makes you feel like the most powerful one-man army in the world. Movement is fluid, switching between the various stances feels controlled and tactical. The player feels powerful in the boots of 5 of the 6 characters that they control during the main campaign, the 6th being Yasser al-Fulani, the president who is assassinated at the beginning of the game. The feel of the gameplay doesn't change whether you are playing as Paul Jackson, Soap McTavish, Captain Price or the AC-130 operator. It is a power based on theme, and each character has their own. Jackson has the might of the United States Armed Forces behind him with all that entails. Soap has training and the element of surprise on his side, as does Price. The AC-130 is a fucking Death Star in the sky for Christ's sake. If this all wasn't enough, Modern Warfare somehow achieves the feat of making the player feel powerful when viewed strictly within the context of their place as part of the small teams of soldiers they form a part of as well. If the player is the most powerful badass in the world on their own, they have functionally the same capability for destruction as Abrams tanks and AH-1 Cobra gunships when paired with their teammates. Price, Soap and Gaz are insurgent eradicating machines. Tens, even hundreds of men bristling with hardware and supported by armour and helicopters are no match for them. Jackson, Vasquez and Griggs cut down their opponents like a farmer cuts hay, and that's even before calling in airstrikes, helicopter pickups and seemingly unlimited reinforcements. The audio design is pretty flawless as well. I'm not just talking about the sounds themselves either. Explosions are bodied and chunky, the voice actors are really throwing themselves into their roles, helicopter blades overhead are thud-thuddy, but it's really how all of these sounds are put together that the player is responding to as they battle their way through Modern Warfare here. Because the audio as much as the visual design creates the environments and sets the mood for much of the game. The effect where a ringing sound is heard after a grenade goes off nearby does an excellent job at putting the player inside the character they are embodying, for instance. The absence of sound in the all gillied up level after the noise and commotion of the previous 4 hours is rendered all the more thunderous by the absence, and does a better job at building this irradiated wasteland than I think any other audio-visual trick ever could. Modern Warfare, I think, does a better job than any other video game at portraying conflict, and yes, the consequences of that conflict. What it fails to do is address the internal conflict that operates inside any piece of interactive media that concerns itself with being a good game, as well as a good piece of war media. Let me explain. Modern Warfare is a blast to play, but wants to talk about the horrors of war at the same time, and you can't really do both, particularly in video games, because you need to successfully engage the player before you can even begin to develop your themes and craft the ultimate message of your piece of work. Modern Warfare does an incredible job of engaging the player because it is fun to play, a sensation that is directly at odds with the story that it is trying to tell. This is called ludonarrative No, don't say it, don't say the word! Not that the game doesn't make efforts to engage with the horrors of war and the damage that men inflict on other men. Being killed rewards the player with a quote from an important person in history, all of them touching on the subject of warfare. I think Infinity Ward intended them to be thought-provoking and interesting truth nugget for players to chew on in the brief downtime before they are resurrected at their most recent checkpoint. They range from the amusing to the profound. The usual sources are in there, Churchill, Sun Tzu, Reagan, etc., but there are some, let us say, unusual ones too. Khrushchev, Arafat, Vladimir Putin? They are the game's most obvious attempt to contextualize the events of the game, invoking real-world figures to force the player to consider what they are playing through, contributing to, in similarly real-world terms. The endgame as Soap & Co. close in on the missile silo is a pretty well-executed escalation, as first one missile and then a second is released. The billowing smoke drifts up into the sky after the incandescent fire from the rocket, and even playing in 2019, my mind was telling me, shit, this is getting real. Really though, the apex of Modern Warfare's anti-war message, if you could call it that, is the nuclear explosion that marks about the halfway point through the main story. Modern Warfare is a frankly fourth wall breaking Black Hawk Down moment, and Jackson's team choose to go back to save the survivors, fully aware of the risk of not escaping the blast radius of the imminent nuclear event. The player, as Jackson, saves the surviving chopper pilot. The music swells as they make their heroic escape, bullets cracking and whizzing around them. Their comrades spill from their chopper, laying down covering fire. They finally collapse breathless and they escape, the militia disappearing away below them as they head into the sky. They are too late, however. A blinding flash of light and then the shockwave and the helicopter drops from the sky. The next section is the bleakest moment in the entire game, both in terms of theme and mechanics. It is the lowest point for the story as well as for the player. Thematically and mechanically, they are powerless, restricted only to slow, pained movement as their body absorbs the deadly radiation around them. You can crawl from your ruined chopper and see the bodies of your teammates lying around you. Or not. There is no gameplay here, your character will die, there are no reloads. The hopelessness of the section is complemented by the next level where Soap & Co. fight a literal uphill battle to discover Al-Assad. All of this contributes to my argument that Modern Warfare really wants to be considered, if not anti-war, then at least of high enough intellectual standing to acknowledge that there is a conflict between what it is saying as a game and what it is telling the player, i.e. that war is hell and also war is fun, and you should totally give yourself up to the intoxicating funness of it all. Because Modern Warfare tells the player that war is fun, it is like super awesome, it's wicked cool dude, and the people that contribute to it are total rad. The credits feature a rap performed in character by the gentleman who voices Staff Sergeant Griggs. The rap, incidentally, is called Deep and Hard, and here are some of its real-life lyrics.
In the mind and time you'll find my lines, combining the twine, underline, rhyme divine. No time you go against me, 249, lift you swiftly. Front lines in it with me, think I'm lying, come and get me. Hot Sergeant Briggs reporting for duty. Roger. Some say this belong in the movie, but this the third installment, Infinity Ward shit. Don't soil your drawers, cause it's deep in his heart, bitch.
It turns up in the game itself early on in the USMC part of the story, so it is official Modern Warfare canon now. The military hardware porn is kind of in its infancy in Modern Warfare, but it is nonetheless advanced for all that. The relish with which the game frames the technological might of the United States Army and the use of that technology on an almost comically under-equipped and ill-trained force is, let us say, troubling. The Geneva Convention is violated at least once by our heroes, but it's okay because the victim was a really, really bad guy, guys. Remember those thought-provoking death quotes from earlier? Well, they also feature facts and data concerning the financial cost of some of the hardware showcased in the game. It is a choice I am sure made by Infinity Ward to draw attention to the eye-watering waste of said money, but functionally it really just contributes further to the fetishization of military hardware that Modern Warfare is ultimately most interested in pushing. Modern Warfare is an exceptionally well-made, well-paced, well-designed piece of interactive media. I think today it is most remembered for its multiplayer, which is perhaps the longest lasting echo of the changes that the game made to the shooter landscape. In 2019, it is still as good as it was 12 years ago. I think it might even be better with the benefit of hindsight, because we are able to appreciate its slickness and, dare I say, succinctness all the better. While it is a great, maybe even nigh-on perfect video game, it fails as a piece of war media. Maybe no game can ever be a good piece of war media purely by virtue of the inherent conflict between what good war media does and what a good video game needs to do. Thanks for watching.